good. We're ready. Okay, cool. If everyone's ready, 7 minutes starting now. And also if just POIs you can just call them out loud if that's okay. Okay. 7 minutes starting now. I affirm the resolution. The Olympic Games should be held at permanent sites, one for winter games and one for summer games. We should be evaluating this round under net benefit insofar as like what's best for the most number of people. The plan is that the Olympic Games should be held in Greenland and Sweden. Three warrants. One, Sweden is always neutral in world conflicts, as is Greenland. Two, Sweden and Singapore are both the two, and Sweden and Greenland are the two most eco-friendly countries in the world. And three, both of these countries are very not crowded, which means that we won't be displacing other populations. One observation, which is that countries will all pitch in to help, like instead of all of them hosting different games at all of their countries at different seasons. Now they will all just like inherently pitch in to like help fund these games instead of hosting it at their own place. They would all divide the responsibility because typically they all host it at different times, but now they're just going to be dividing the cost. Okay. Advantage 1 is going to be climate change. The A point is that the Rio 2016 Olympics were the second of Brazil's arrival. We're supposed to be Brazil's arrival as a world power through dominance in sports. But however, it led to having the opposite effect. For example, the Olympic court led to having the most highest emissions in any world game ever. And 15 of the 27 venues have hosted some sort of event since the games sit largely abandoned. Their decay and disrepair are a constant reminder of what was meant to be. And for example, even these stadiums have a 950,000 electric bill even after the games were already held, which means that we're wasting electricity and we're also causing so much emissions through the building of these stadiums in the first place. The B point is going to be deforestation. In order to build all of these stadiums in the first place, the Rio Games and all of the other games had to like deforest a lot of places in these stadiums in order to build these. But the third point is going to be water pollution. In order to actually build all of these stadiums, they also had to use tremendous gallons of water, and the Olympics contributed to all of this. For example, the Rio Games produced 70,000 tons of waste, and they used 29,500 gigawatts of electricity, most of it coming from non-renewables. They also consumed 23,500 liters of fuel. The impact is going to be climate change. We say that climate change causes extinction because so much emissions and so much lack of renewables, especially since climate change is on the tipping point in the status quo. We say that that causes extinction because of using so many non-renewables means that we're having like ocean acidification and all of these other impacts. We say that framing is like climate change first because that's like the most probable extinction scenario. The solvency is that one stadium per game means that we're recycling the same stadium every year, which means that we have way less emissions and also way less electricity costs because now we're reusing the same stadium. That also means that we don't have to spend thousands of like gallons of water into building these stadiums since they're going to be reused year after year. This obviously is that we have less trash globally. It's going to be concentrated in one place, which makes it easier to clean up each year. We have facilities to use the electricity to build non-renewables in the area, and since in Greenland we already have renewables in place. Okay, the second advantage is going to be poverty. The A point is displacement. During the years of construction, thousands of people were displaced or dislocated. For example, the staging of the last 20 Olympics displaced 20 million people. The B point is going to be that 75,000 people were displaced by the Seoul Games, when the government cleared low-income areas for stadiums. This argument is that they specifically target low-income areas for stadiums where they can clear out all these people and build it in those areas. For example, 30,000 predominantly African Americans were forced to move during the Atlanta Games, which makes way for sporting venues, which means that 1.25 million people also lost their homes during the Beijing Olympics. The solvency is that Ireland and Sweden aren't as populated, meaning that they don't displace a lot of people. Also, it's going to be a one-time thing, which means that we only displace them at least once. If we are displacing anyone, we displace them once rather than displacing them year after year and causing the harmful of like all these minority groups. The B point is going to be workers' abuses. Workers come in from places like Dubai and Saudi Arabia just for funding the Olympics, and they have low pay, they have bad working conditions, they're just forced to build these at the lowest cost possible, especially in developing countries. These are abusive environments. They happen every year, and this outweighs on cyclicality. The solvency is that the AF builds one stadium, and that means that every year workers aren't abused. The C point is going to be at gentrification. We say that in the world of the negative, you're speeding up gentrification because it gives host countries an excuse to displace its people. That has a few impacts. One is going to be dehumanization. If these workers are constantly having to work in like these bad working conditions and they're being gentrified and displaced, this is really bad for dehumanization. But also the fact that they're being displaced means that all these low income minority groups are going to be like cyclically like oppressed in society, which impacts out to structural violence. The third advantage is going to be players themselves. The 8 point is that Olympic players state that they want one place to play. They specifically state that they only want one place because this allows them to get familiar with the terrain and the environment. The B point is that several Olympic players say that it's a hassle because they have to move several months before each of the Olympic games start, which means that they constantly have to keep moving. The impact is going to be a health for the Olympians. If they constantly have to keep moving, that means that their immunity is going to be compromised. But the B point is that there's going to be more revenue because if the players stay in one place, that means that their performance is going to be better, which means that they're doing overall better for the Olympics, which means more people are going to be watching it, which means the revenues are going to be better, especially for brands, etc.
They get better because they train.
And also, they're going to get better because they train in the same place, which means they're used to they're used to like the weather and the terrain, etc. Okay. The fourth advantage is not at this time, please. The fourth advantage is going to be the economy. The 8 point is crowding out. In Brazil, the government wasted so much precious money to build the Olympics. Brazil's hospitals and universities were broke. Businesses were closing. People were living in extreme poverty, and gang violence broke out. These were all because of the Olympics. Brazil was in a very poor state, and the Olympics made it bankrupt and poor. They put up a facade that their country was doing amazing, but the people were in pain, and the Olympics made things so much worse for this country. For example, the B point is going to be that the amount of money that countries have to spend is increasingly worrying other nations because tourist spending rises, and overall the debt of a country would face from the Olympics is astounding. So basically their debt is going to be on net extremely large because hosting is so expensive. For example, the bidding process alone in 2012 causes $20 million for each bidding city, and also it costs $6.5 billion in Paris, and also like billions of other dollars. Both Paris and London's local governments put aside billions of dollars just for the games, and the burden of the cost falls on the government and therefore the taxpayers, which are these individuals who live in there, and they have to bear the brunt of all this huge amounts of money. The impact is going to be one, gang violence. We contend that like if all these players are being displaced, and if the government spends so much money, they're going to be neglecting other places, which is going to cause a lot of internal strife and civil war. That impacts out to extinction because we say that internal rife means that you're having like a rise of authoritarianism, which means that because there's so much internal rife, that means like a higher probability of like civil war and internal rife. But the second impact is going to be education. Insofar as we're crowding out investment from other things like education and healthcare, that means that impacts out to like dehumanization because people are constantly not having access to healthcare, and instead the government is building these huge amounts of games when we could just have it in the same place every year. The fifth advantage is going to be human rights abuses, i.e. Russia. Some countries have human rights abuses like Russia and China, and you give major money to them. You also give them publicity. For example, after people went to Russia, the Olympics, Americans were more likely to support Putin. This is empirically proven that Americans supported Putin more after the Olympics because the Olympics had like a good show of him. But this is really bad because we say that like countries like China and Russia have already historically human rights abuses in places like Xinjiang and Ukraine, which means that we give them more publicity and more money, and boycotts have historically not worked.
You can't stop crying.
All right, hi everyone, my name is Ria. I will be the first speaker for the negation in today's debate. The order is going to be I'll do 3 negation arguments onto the affirmative case, the whole thing in order, and then 1 more negation argument if I have time. I will probably be going a little bit fast, but let me know if I need to slow or clear. Cool. I'll start with the topic case. Starting with the topic case, we agree with the framework of net benefits on the observation. They said that every single country is going to pitch in 4 responses. First, not every country is going to pitch in. No country will do all the work. It's like a group project where every single country slacks off. But second of all, this won't happen anyway. Even if they did somehow fiat it, there's no benefit to the other countries helping. America's not going to want to fund Greenland and Sweden. Like there's no benefit to their own economy. Third, both countries are European. This is like extremely like biased towards the European continent. But fourth, there's no guarantee that Sweden and Greenland would always be neutral like for the rest of their lives. Sorry, not for the rest of their lives, but for the rest of like the universe. Which means that like you can't buy that there's going to be like no probability of war interrupting in some sort of way or form. On to the first disadvantage. This is on the economy. 3 subpoints. First is tourism and the regional economy boost. Hosting large-scale events contributes to long-term economic growth in tourism. Look at how the 1984 Summer Olympics gave LA 215 millions in surplus in operating, an additional 289 million in broadcasting, plus over 33 million tourists. The impact of tourism in LA's community has lasted almost 40 years later as it remains one of the most popular US cities. Second is global trade. Look at how the 1968 Summer Olympics allowed Mexico to make a leap into the ranks of industrial nations, and Spain joined the European Economic Community within a year of the 1986 Barcelona Summer Olympics. Prove how hosting can benefit a country. Third is that long-term investment improves cities. Look at how cities will have to invest in this infrastructure and transport to cater for the influx of visitors. For example, look at how there have been significant significant investments in public transport projects around London before and after the Olympics took place. This also creates tons of jobs, which creates thousands of jobs and offsets any jobs that the affirmative tells you you lose. Onto the links, the plan passes, which means one, we see that the Olympic Games can no longer impact a wide variety of, one, if the plan passes, then the Olympic Games no longer impact a wide variety of nations. It only affects one, as it remains a stationary one permanent site. Two, traveling tourists no longer travel to watch the Olympics and consider traveling to new places. They only go to one place over and over again, which means that without tourism, countries have less money to invest in their domestic economies, unable to improve the quality of life of their residents. Third, small businesses. Tourists spend millions of dollars in small businesses when they travel, especially to the Olympics. This is all lost due to the Olympics being in one place. Small businesses in the places where they grew due to the Olympics are forced to shut down, making them unemployed and putting people at risk of poverty. Onto the impacts. First is the economy. Countries lose money and lack diversity in their economies. The second is poverty. The small business owners are forced into unemployment without the popularity of the Olympic Games and fall into poverty. This is cyclical and last generations extend my opponent's impacts on structural balance and poverty. I can't take it right now. Third is quality. The third is quality of life. The residents of the countries have a lower quality of life when there's more excess money coming in from tourism. On to the counter plan. The Olympic Games will switch off six different permanent sites for the Winter Games and for the Summer Olympics. This would occur on the 6 different continents besides Antarctica, and the IOC, or the International Olympic Committee, would determine which states are best suited for this city to take place. This is mutually exclusive. You can have one site and also have 6. And in addition, we have net benefits because we gain access to more sites. On the solvency. First, you allow each continent to gain an increase in the economic boost, which means we solve back for our disadvantage. Second of all, the costs and the benefits are divided equally. No one country is to take on too much of the burden. Third, even if there is a cost, since there are at least 6 different continents, it would take at least 20 years before going back to the original one. This means that they have time to rebuild infrastructure or anything they lose. Second counterplan. The Olympic Games will rotate hosting the Olympics only in countries in which the IOC deems has the necessary infrastructure to host it. Again, the Olympic Games will rotate hosting the Olympics only in countries in which the IOC deems has the necessary infrastructure to host it. This is mutually exclusive. Sorry, what did you say?
POI, quick question about the counterplan.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Oh, wait. So what's the status of both counterplans?
They're conditional.
Cool.
The first, this is mutually exclusive. You cannot have non-permanent sites and also have a permanent Olympic place. Yeah, cool. Solvency. First is that having good infrastructure in places makes it easier for countries to recover from the impacts of hosting the games and doesn't put them at risk of falling in debt. Second, it doesn't bite into a disadvantage on how countries will lose tourism because it still moves around. This is preferable to the affirmative plan. And third, look to historical precedent. Look to how LA was awarded in 1984 games unopposed and negotiated the use of existing infrastructure. This competition turned profitable and suddenly the Olympics got it to lure back. We basically continue this. On to the affirmative case. On their first advantage. Okay, on their first advantage, the overview here is that any climate change is depending on money. We can't invest in renewables if we don't have money. They say that the games will be invented, but first of all, a couple of responses. First, this is non-unique. Their electric buildings still happen in the first place. They say that there's deforestation, but using multiple sites can allow countries to invest more money in stopping climate change. You can't just solve for climate change if you have one country change its practices. Look at how China is the biggest emitter right now. If you don't solve for China, you don't solve for climate change, period. Additionally, they say extinction, but remember, one Olympics game every 2 years is not going to cause climate change no matter how many emissions it creates. Look at how 98% of climate change emissions are caused by oil and gas companies. On their impacts, they say that climate change is most probable, but remember, the economy is the only way to solve for climate change. Developing countries can't help climate change if they're poor. On the second advantage, overview here is that the government can reinvest in poverty when they have millions and millions of dollars of tourism and investment after the global popularity of the games. This reinvestment does not occur in their world. How do they split the profit? They say the government targets low-income areas, but Sweden and agreement, they'll do the same thing. They say they solve because they only have one stadium, but you still need to uphold the stadiums in your world. Sorry.
Why?
I can't take it right now. Wait, actually, is it short or?
Oh, I was just gonna ask, historically, have governments invested in renewables after we've gotten money from the games?
I don't think so. I'm not really sure. Sorry about that. They say that the solvency is they're only going to solve for one stadium, but remember, you still have to manage these stadiums. You still have to have people controlling them and managing them even after the games end or during the after to uphold the stadiums, which means you're just gonna make it worse. Third advantage, they say that players want it. First, turn this against them because making them go to different terrains allows them to get better at their sport. Second of all, it gives an unfair advantage to the people who live in Greenland and Sweden because they don't have to move around. They already are accustomed to this climate and they only move once a year. Third, the terrain doesn't matter because some of the what? Never mind. Some of the sports are indoors, I guess. And on to the fourth, they said talk about crowding out. Overview. They have no warrant that proves that countries will no longer invest in services once they get the games. They said that the Olympics made it worse, but the debt is not as large as the millions they make it seem, especially since you just talk about revenue expense. You don't actually talk about total profitability, and total profitability is usually positive. They say that they cost $20 million for host city, but this is offset by the tourism they get. Impacts, turn their impacts. You need money to invest in tourism in order to prevent gang violence. A lot of these things already had gang violence in the first place. The Olympics, even though they made it time. It would have been better than if they just had let the countries alone. On dehumanization, they say people don't have health care, but they have no solvency that the government is gonna. I already did the top case on the Advantage 5. They talk about human rights violations. This entire contention rests on the war that Americans like Putin more after joining. That Russia hosted the games. Judges, I urge you to gut check this. Americans are like Russophobic, especially after the Ukraine conflict. So that means that like even if it had short-term like worse effects for Russia, like long-term it didn't help. This kills the rest of their contention and doesn't prove that more human rights violations will occur. Look at how people don't view Russia as a tourist destination just because of the Olympics. Okay, fourth off. Interpretation: the affirmative must specify and defend one tropical fruit in the PMC. Violation: the affirmative does not mention anything about a tropical fruit or defend it in a PMC. In addition, I asked a POI for them to specify the fruit 3 times, and they didn't even take it. Standards: first is healthy eating. Fruit is good for you. All debaters should defend a fruit in the round to promote healthy eating. Debate space is key because all debaters run out a tremendous lack of sleep and amount of caffeine. So we need to like promoting fruits to combat that. This is the internal link to the debate space because we can't because debaters need to be healthy to debate. Second is nutrition education. If debaters eat too many tropical fruits, then they can be subject to bad side effects, which is why we must promote only eating one singular fruit. Nutrition is the internal link to all education because if we're malnourished, we can't create good arguments. Third is topic-specific education. Living a healthy lifestyle is critical for all Olympic athletes. Thus, we are the only team willing to invest in the well-being of our competitors to foster a healthy round. Look to how in the Brazil Olympics, they offered 40 different tropical fruits. On the voters, first is fairness because we should both be able to talk about our favorite fruits. Our favorite fruit is mangoes. Theirs is like they nothing because they haven't defined it. Second is education. Fruits are educational. We can spend time learning about them and convince baby debaters to eat more fruits too. Third is accessibility. Accessibility is a prerequisite to all other voters because if you have bad health, you can't enter the debate space. On paradigmatic issues, this is a priority because nutrition is a prerequisite to debating. You need to be alive in order to debate. Second, no RBIs because it's a ploy by the food industry to contest the value of tropical fruits. Third is drop the debater to incentivize tropicality in future rounds to spread good health in the debate space. And fourth is competing interpretations is better than reasonability because it's unreasonable to not like tropical fruits. We affirm, we negate.
Okay, cool. So the order is going to be a new off. It's going to be the. Okay, hold on. Give me 1 second. A new
Sorry,
off.
can I have the plan text in the chat?
Oh yeah, sure.
I'll
Sorry.
do it.
Okay. Sure. So order is going to be new off. It'll be disadvantages in order or counterplans, disadvantages in order, and then advantages. Everyone good? Oh, and then the shell, like I'll just respond to it after the new off. Okay, give me 1 second to just get my timer out. Okay, cool. Sorry, 1 second. My computer is like. Okay. Everyone good? Cool. If everyone's good, we can start now. The first off is the interpretation debater should not read conditional advocacy to clarify. This does not include theory arguments, violation. They read 2 conditional counterplans. The centers. One is going to be ground and time. 7. They get a bunch of time to read a bunch of advocacies, and they're going to be able to collapse the block that I can't respond to them in the time crunch 20R. Each of these is opposing game a over issue, which means that if they can just go for which counterplan they want to, and then that's going to be really hard for weighing, and also makes the 2AR virtually impossible. They also leads to strats queue because they're conditional, which means that they can choose to extend or drop anything, which means I have to keep changing my strategy. I literally have to respond to 2 arguments, but even if I have offense on it, they can just drop the counterplan, which is really bad for debate. The argument is going to be the fact that the education is a voter. We say that in order for debate to be fair, we need fairness first. For the first argument is going to be that debate has to be fair in order for us to engage in the first place. And we say that this precludes us from engaging in any of the offense in the round, which also creates unfair advantages. We say that fairness is going to be really key because it means that we're not going to be able to engage in the round, which also means that the conditional theory is going to be dropped the debater. And so far as there's literally no way for us to engage in the round is huge. The fact that they already read the conditional advocacy, they could have just read 1 counterplan and just called it a day, but no, they read 2. This is going to be dropped the debater because it skews the round to the point where there's no way for us to engage. Drop the debater prevents future like abuse in future rounds. Next off, or sorry, on the disads. The first is that they make arguments about the economy. They talk about tourism and long-term econ growth, and they talk about surplus of 250 million, but there's going to be a few arguments. The first argument is that none of this is actually contextual to whether it has a surplus and aid, but the second argument is that a lot of the examples they cite are developed countries, not developing countries. We say that in developing countries is going to be uniquely key. This is why the plan text uniquely solves this, because we give you countries that are already developed, which means that they're not going to be spending this much money. But the second argument is that they talk about, the B point is that they talk about long-term investment for jobs, but the first argument is going to be the fact that the infrastructure you build is specifically for the games. Look at the fact that in Rio de Janeiro, which is an example that they conceded in their last speech, they build infrastructure and then they never actually they never actually use it again, which means like now you're just wasting materials. But the second argument is going to be that these jobs are short-term jobs, which means, but they also concede all of our arguments about workers' rights abuses, which means that even if you're making jobs, we turn this argument because we say that these jobs are bad. But the third argument is going to be that these jobs are going to be offshore, which means that you're hiring workers from like Dubai and Saudi Arabia, which means you're not even stimulating the economy in a specific area. Then they make arguments about the traveling tourist normal travel. But first argument is going to be the fact that they don't give you any warranty as to how much funds this traveling actually does. But the second argument is that we're going to say that the actual funding of like the specific actually building of these areas is going to be outweighing any of their traveling costs, which means that even if tourists are going there, it's going to be short term, first of all. But second of all, this money goes back into just paying back for the Olympics. A lot of empirically, almost every single country that has been developing has gone into debt after the Olympics, which turns case with the third argument of small businesses. You can look to the fact that millions of dollars of small businesses they say this they concede all of our gentrification arguments, which takes out small businesses, because we say that specifically you look towards taking out small businesses first, which means that now you're going to be like taking out multiple different small businesses into different countries, which also turns their arguments. They say that countries lose money and they talk about poverty and unemployment, but the first argument is in the fact that this money does not outweigh the tremendous cost it takes to actually build a lot of these things. Also to look to the fact that the people hosting the Olympics have to actually pay for the hotel rooms and things like that. But then they talk about like global trade and they talk about poverty and unemployment, but this is also a one-time thing, which means that you outweigh the job creation is not going to happen. Then on the next descent or on the counterplane, they said the Olympic Games should last 6 years, but this doesn't solve for anything. There's going to be few solvency deficits. The first argument is that you don't solve for climate change, because that means that you're still going to be really rebuilding infrastructure, which is going to be really bad. But the second argument is that it's not going to solve back because because of the workers' rights abuses are still going to happen, because now every 6 years you're going to be switching countries. But the third argument is going to be all of our terrain arguments, because we say it's harder for workers. Then on the next counterplan, oh wait, actually, I'll go on the off about the fruit. Counter interpretation debaters don't have to talk about tropical fruit in the round if the resolution does not specifically specify tropical fruit. They talk about the first argument is going to be predictability. We shouldn't be talking about tropical fruit because it takes away from actual educationality. But the second argument is going to be the fact that it allows for us to have frivolous or talking to topics that aren't educational. But the third argument is that they say that it's going to be really bad for talking about the specific topic. But then on their own, we're going to say that this impacts our fairness, because there's no way for us to predict that they want us to talk about fruit. We can literally talk about anything, which is going to be really bad. But now on the line by line, they first talk about standards, they talk about healthy eating, and they talk about lack of sleep. But there's no warrant as to why people are going to actually switch to eating more fruit if we just talk about it. But the second argument is going to be the fact that they talk about how there's only singular fruits and there's topics about calculation, but this doesn't solve back, because we say that the talking about it doesn't solve back. Then they talk about the Brazil Olympics and how they need a healthy lifestyle, but we aren't even talking about the players. We're not talking to the players, which means the players aren't going to solve back. But then on fairness, they don't give you any warrants for why this is true. But you should also look to the fact that you should just gut check when theory shows are like frivolous. Look to the fact that they say no RBIs, because you can't. They don't give you any warrants for real no RBIs. We're gonna make arguments as to why we get an RBI on this topic. We don't get they don't get RBIs on our show because we say that this is abusive and precludes our ability to act in the round. But we specifically get an RBI because they just waste time. They don't give any arguments as to why this precludes them from being able to act in the round, which means that they're just wasting time in the 1AR, which is already super time crunch, which is a reason why we should get an RBI. But then they say on competing interpretations of reasonability. Well, sure, we agree, but then they say that to drop the debater. There's no reason to drop the debater because we don't mention the thing that they want. This actually takes away from things like topic education, but also takes away from things where people want to talk about oppression and things like that, which is going to be bad for debate on the next counterplan. Their counterplan text with the that the Olympic Games should have a rotating host only hosting the Olympic Games only in which countries that the specific areas deemed to be necessary. But there's a few problems. This is also a solvency deficit. This counterplan also means that which countries get to decide who gets to host, which means that there's going to be a solvency deficit. But the second argument is the fact that even if they do decide that we're going to say that this is bad, because this means that you're going to still link it to all of our arguments. Our argument is that you need a stable country to prevent wastage of resources. They don't solve back for this, which means their counterplan doesn't solve the F. But then you can perm to the counterplan, because even if we have like specific areas of the that use these areas, you can still have a specific you can still have a board that deems where we can put these like specific stadiums, which solves back the counterplan on the advantages. The advantage that we're going to be going for is going to be climate change. There's a few arguments. This is majorly under responded to. If we win climate change, that means that we should win the debate. The first argument is going to be the fact that the first argument that our argument is that right now the places with Olympic Games have the highest emissions in the world. We talk about how 15 of the 27 venues were abandoned. This statistic was conceded, which means that we get access to all of the wastage arguments, but we also get access to deforestation. They don't solve back for deforestation. This has a 100% strength of link. Their only responses are really bad here. The first argument they say is that it's non-unique because an electric building is still going to happen, but our argument is that you're creating buildings that for no reason. There's no reason to build these buildings when you're not actually going to use them. We give you specific examples where we don't actually use these buildings when we build them, which solves back, which means that you're not actually solving back with the second argument. They say that you need renewables. This argument is so crap. Like, this doesn't make any sense. Our argument at first is that you don't get access to renewables with gentrification, but secondly, all of our dead arguments, we say that you're not going to be able to switch renewables with the third argument is that our plan text solves. We say that the countries that we specifically pick are more environmentally friendly. That's why our plan text uniquely solves. Well, theirs counterplans don't, because we say that our like Sweden and like Ireland are uniquely switching back to like renewable energy, which means that we actually solve back with the third argument is maybe the fact that they don't give any single example. We ask a POI as to when the specific countries that were able to like be able to switch to renewable energy after the Olympics, and they can give you a single country that actually switches to renewables, which means that we get access to this. But then they say that China's the biggest emitter. This is a reason why we shouldn't host the games in China, because now they're going to be having to massively increase their emissions in order to host the games. They concede all of our arguments as to why this leads to extinction. We say that climate change comes first before any of their econ impacts, because they don't do weighing analysis as to why econ comes first, and we say that climate change comes first because it's always a cyclical impact, and we always tend to ignore it. Which we said, then they say that the econ is the only way to solve back for climate change. We say that there's all reasons why we can solve back for the economy. They don't give any warrants as to why countries actually uniquely get into econ collapse because of this, which means that they don't solve back for. There's no reason. They're just saying that countries can improve their economies with no brink argument as to why their economies would fail without the Olympics, which means there's no brink scenario. Then we're gonna go for the poverty arguments, because we say you displace a lot of workers in Saudi leads to gentrification, which you can extend all of our structural impacts. And then on the players arguments, we're not going to be going for this argument, but we'll respond to the terms of the first argument. They say that it allows players to get better at their sport. They just make a warrant with a claim with no warrant. We say that it's worse because they don't get to get access to the weather. Then they say that some players don't get access, but we say if they host it in the same place, players are going to be able to adapt and they're going to be able to get better at their sport. And also we say that it's better because now they get to train in these specific facilities, which is an econ argument that goes conceded, because we say that now these players are going to be able to live in these areas, which actually means that you're going to be solving back for the econ, because they're going to be supplying that city with like a constant economic funding. At the end of the day, they don't have any solvency on how they actually have a brink scenario for econ. We win all of our disads, but either way, we win the condo arguments.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to be going on to the theory, the condo theory shell first, and then I'm going to be going on to the tropicality shell. Then I will go on to their first advantage on climate change. Then I will go to our first disadvantage on econ. And if I have time, I will go back to any of the other arguments and making the round. If everyone is ready with that.
Wait,
awesome.
sorry. Did you just repeat the order for me?
Condo or conditionality, tropicality, advantage 1 on climate change, disadvantage 1 on econ. All right. Please just yell out your POVs because I'm not looking at the screen. My time starts now. So the first interpretation is that the debater should not read conditional advocacies, but we have a counter interpretation. The LOC may defend 2 conditional advocacies. Our counter interpretation is beneficial because we should be allowed to have conditional advocacies. Here are our standards. Our first counter standard is on critical thinking economies. The AFI needs to defend all parts of the plan, which ultimately leads to topic specific education of the affirmation to be able to defend their advocacy on multiple fronts. This impacts you out to a more educational round. Then secondly, we have real world education. When a politician proposes a policy, they are attacked on different political angles. Other politicians will propose their own policies in some way, and some may pursue the policies and some may not. The best way is to model Congress in the process of comparing plans. So in debate, we need to be role-playing our policymakers. And thirdly, neg flexibility. Having different conditional advocacies is key to having the negation multiple strategies. The app can create infinite plans that support the resolution, like small apps, which can make it more difficult for the neg to predict hurting fairness. This means that the app gets the first and last word, whereas the negation having access to different strategies. This is why conditionality is key. Then let's go into their standards. They talk about grounds loss, but we argue that this is proven abuse is more important than potential abuse. They have actually no proof that we're going to be dropping our counter plan, so they're not actually losing ground in this round. This is a completely frivolous theory shell. Let's go on their second argument. They say that we can just like kick this and it makes their PMR harder, but this is checked back because the PMR gets golden turns. The affirmation literally gets final say, and they say that we can just drop it. But they've read conditional advocacies on this before. We've literally hit these people before, and they're just trying to run this frivolously. Let's go to the voters. We argue that fairness should be valued over education. We need a fair debate on both sides, and we have access to equal ground in order to debate. And my opponents are not allowing us to have so because we're not having that negative flexibility. Their biggest mistake is that they didn't read a priori on this theory shell. You're gonna be dropping the entire shell. Doesn't matter if it's more, you're not gonna be able to weigh over the case, and it doesn't matter more than tropicality. Thus, drop the debater because they're being abusive and they're obviously frivolous. So let's go to tropicality, and let me tell you why tropicality is very key in this round. Let's go to their counter interpretation and talk about how debaters don't have to do this if the resolution doesn't specify anything about tropical fruits. This is a terrible interpretation because the resolution barely mentions anything, but we make arguments about anyways. Like, how are we talking about Sweden? How are we talking about Greenland? and it was not in the resolution. So how can we not make any arguments that were not inside of the resolution? That's a terrible interpretation. Now, why is tropicality not a frivolous theory shell? Tropicality is very key to this round because there's topic-specific education. And now I'm going to extend our first and third standard where we tell you that this round is literally specifically about the Olympics, and the Olympics need to be healthy in order to compete, and we need to have tropical fruits in order to have that healthy eating. And debaters should also be mimicking this because debaters need to be healthy as well. They talk about how their counter standards that they are on probability and how this is not related, but turn this against because probability is bad, right? We need to be thinking on our feet. We need to have competition in order to become the best and then learn the most out of the debate round. If we can predict every single thing in the round, then we're not going to be able to learn. Then secondly, they said it's bad for the topic education, but obviously we already told you that topic specific education is key because the fruit is needed to be an Olympian. Let's go to our standards. They say that there's no warrant that people will eat fruit by just talking about fruit, but we tell you that TOC, this round is very key because it's being recorded right now, and there people our spectators are watching this round. They're going to be learning about how to eat healthier, and that's going to impacting them. To extend how this is the internal link to accessibility, we need to have healthy eating in order to access to the debate space. Then extend our nutrition education and extend our topic specific education voter. So let's go to the voters. The most important voter that was dropped by my opponents is our accessibility warrant, which tells you that accessibility is a prerequisite to all other voters. So you're going to be dropping them on fairness in education because you cannot have any fairness in education if you have bad health. You can't even enter the debate space on the first place. And they said that they get RBIs and it's abusive, but we tell that our RBIs are abusive because they allow good debaters who are people who are good at theory shows, who push people like us out of the space. More accessible. I'll take it right at the end. We're trying to make debate more accessible, and they're just trying to push us out of this space. And they talk about how they're wasting time in the 1AR, but it wastes more time if they had just responded to Ria's POI. Right? She asked your POI to ask you to defend a tropical fruit, but you chose not to take that. That would have taken 30 seconds instead of us having to waste 2 minutes on this entire theory show. So overall, they're conceding that competing interpretations over our reasonability, which means that you cannot buy any of their arguments on how this theory show is frivolous or unreasonable. I'll take your POI.
Sure. You say RBIs are abusive, and then on our condo shell, you say you get an RBI because we were being abusive. Why do you get an RBI on the condo shell, but why do we not get an RBI on the tropicality shell?
That's the exact same thing that you guys said on our theory show. What's my next argument? Oh, let's go to the affirmations first advantage on climate change. So overall, let's look at this argument here. We're telling you that cutting down trees to host the Olympics one time in 1 year is offset by the millions of dollars that these countries are going to be making from hosting, right? If you make this money, we've told you that through the Los Angeles warrant, 40 years later after they hosted the games, they still have millions of dollars flowing into the country due to that tourism. That money can be reinvested into renewable energy in the long term. So we're telling you that we're the only ones who have the access to solving for climate change in the long term analysis, whereas they can only solve for it in the short term, and they are not actually able to solve for it because only Greenland and only Sweden are having access to this money and this tourism. Greenland and Sweden are not going to be investing in climate change. And we tell you that specifically, by us changing the games and making it in different places, developing countries who are the biggest contributors to climate change and CO2 emissions now I need to be able to have that money in order to reinvest and switch off of that fossil fuels that they're using. We're the only sides that are actually able to help these poorer countries and make them money, rather than the richer nations being the only ones who get to benefit from the games and extend our 98% warrant. Where we're telling you that and basically climate change, the economy is a prerequisite to climate change because you cannot solve for climate change if you don't have money. Let's go to the negations first disadvantage on the economy. They say that none of this disadvantage is like contextualized and these countries are already developed, but this is not true. Like many of these countries would tell you that Spain, that Mexico, before they were even developed countries, the Olympics is what put them on the map, and the Olympics is what allowed them to have that money. And they tell you the infrastructure is specific for that games, and infrastructure is bad, but extend how the infrastructure can get there. It requires new trains and buses and whatnot. And it's basically improving the quality of life of every single person in that nation. Then they say that the workers from Dubai are not going to be able to help the economy. We're telling you that these small businesses, the ones who are running these tourist shops, they are the ones who are making the most money out of the Olympics games being hosted there. It's not going to be these big businesses that are actually helping the entire economy and helping the quality of life of every single citizen. Then they say that we're just like building these areas and we're just going to be building different things, but be obviously better for jobs because we're allowing more construction workers to get jobs, and it's going to be improving their quality of life. And they talk about how long-term investment is going to be improving these things. They say that it's going to be going into debt, and these countries are going to be money. I'll take the POI at the end. They say that we're going to be going to debt, but going into debt is not going to be occurring because they're making millions of dollars. We literally give you statistics about how $200 million are made from each country, like hosting the games. They're not going to be going into debt. If they said themselves in their own case that it costs $20 million to invest or to host the games, then making $200 million is going to offset all those impacts. And they talk about how small businesses are going to be taken out, but we tell you that multiple small businesses have been benefited in different countries. And finally, on the impact where they tell us that job creation is not going to happen. But look to our LA war, and we tell you this is lasting 40 years down the line. It's not just going to be a small impact. It's literally changing the entire economies of these nations. So with that, I will then respond to the counterplan. So let's go to the first counterplan. I'll have the games will switch off in 6 permanent places. They said that we have no solvency that we need to solve for climate change or infrastructure. But we tell you that we're solving for climate change because they need money in order to invest in that renewable energy. Whereas in their world, they are only allowing Greenland and Sweden to get that money. How are they able to reinvest in climate change if only 2 countries are involved? The climate change is a global issue, and so the Olympics, which provides money to the entire world, should be investing in. Let's go to the second counterplan. They tell us that the counterplan means each country gets to decide what they need to do. They need a stable economy to do this, and they're going to be permanent. But we tell you that the IOC gets to decide where these countries are going to be, and we tell you that's better than letting these 2 privileged European countries host and get all of the benefits. We need these developing nations to also improve their economies and also make the entire global stage more stable as a whole. So for those reasons, it's quite clear, judges, that the only side that is able to solve for the Olympics on the climate change level, on the level of quality of life, is a negation. And for that, I strongly urge a negative ballot. Thank you. All right. Sorry. All right, this will be the last speech of the negation in today's debate. The order is going to be tropicality at the top, their theory shell, the climate change advantage, the econ advantage, and weighing. So once again, tropicality, theory, climate change, econ. Cool. The overview in this debate is that my opponents simply don't do enough work on the tropicality shell to win. So a couple things that they're going to be losing on. First of all, they can see the accessibility standard. We're going to be winning on this because they can see that our first standard on healthy eating is the key towards accessibility, because debaters have to be healthy in order to enter the debate stage. Extend our warranting on how this is TOC, and the fact that this round is recording specifically means that more debaters watch this round, the more that they're going to be incentivized to eat tropical fruits because they know how good it is and spread this warranting into other generations. Which means we help debaters, which is a material impact worth a ballot, because we're the only team and allowing debaters to enter the debate space. Second of all, they consider education warranting. Look to our topic-specific education standard, where we give you specific warrants why the tropicality is topic-specific related, because we specifically give you warrants for the Brazil Olympics, but then turn their RVI or extend our turn on how we specifically said they made us waste 2 minutes on reading this theory shell when they could have just answered our POI asking which fruit did you want to defend. They made us lose 2 minutes of education in the debate space. That's a material that's also an impact worth a ballot, because that means that this turns any education warranting they could have made, because they could have answered it in the POI. Third, and most importantly, they consider a priority warranting on how you need to be alive or you need to be like healthy in order to be in the debate space and to be here right now, which means they concede a priori, and thus they also concede that tropicality comes before theory, because specifically, like I said, you need to be healthy before you can access fairness, and fairness and education are the only things that they go for. On the theory shell, again, we already told you why tropicality comes before theory, because of education and because of accessibility. But second of all, extend our counter standards, extend our counter standards. These are all unique reasons why not to vote for the negations counterplan. You can weigh these against them. But second of all, vote our proven over potential abuse. Look to how their only standard is pretty much ground, and the fact that we didn't even drop our counterplans, which means that they didn't even lose any ground. So at the end of the day, you're either going to be voting on something that's potential could happen in future rounds, or you can vote on something that one, our opponents already did to us before, and second of all, that we are going to be solving for. The RVI's debate doesn't even matter because we don't even read it on RVI, so screw that. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day. On to the case debate. The major arguments that are going to come down to the end of the round are going to be climate change and the economy, because I'm pretty sure that's what my opponents are going to be going for. But climate change, 2 major responses. First of all, extend our turns on how we are going to solve climate change better. Even if we don't have examples of countries switching to renewables, extend how the economy is still the prerequisite of fighting climate change for developing countries. You can still make the argument that these developing countries wouldn't have even been able to do, they would have made climate change worse if they had been taking place, if they had been doing the Olympics and had not had access to all the money that they got from the Olympics. But second of all, you can say that even if my opponents get access to all of their links on climate change, it doesn't matter because they don't solve climate change. Climate change is a global phenomenon, and extend our 2 terms on how 98% of the climate change emissions are caused by oil and gas companies, which have nothing to do with the Olympics. But then second of all, extend our China card, which means even if you host the Olympics in Greenland and Sweden, even if you make them the cleanest they can be, even if they emit 0 emissions, you still have China emitting these mass pollutants. So even if you don't get China, by the way, China's not even in our plan text, so it doesn't even mean we link to that. But second of all, even if you don't do anything, even if they get access to all of their links, they don't solve for climate change. They don't even have any short-term impacts, which means they have a little impacts at best. But second second of all, the reason that we were only on the case level is on the econ. Remember, 3 warranting. First of all, our long-term trade check back helps. Look to where Spain were and how Spain was able to join the European Economic Community a year after it joined the Olympics. Is a direct correlation. You could say that even if there's a short-term a trade-off because of jobs and the economy and stuff, this is paid back to look to Los Angeles and the next 40 years. Second of all, their jobs warranting doesn't even matter when compared to the small businesses that are helped. Look to the correlation between the Olympics taking place in a country, especially a developing country, and the number of small businesses that are helped there, even if the jobs are offset from other countries such as Dubai. It is nothing compared to the millions of jobs that are being helped by small businesses. Third, on debt or any other argument about the economy, these are all offset by our counterplans and how we are switching off and how they're still all developing countries that we're going to be helped. They're not random countries. We're not just throwing them to the wolves. They're still being infrastructure. They're still high level countries that are being helped. On to the layering debate. First was the tropicality comes before conditionality. The tropicality shell is the first thing you should be evaluating at the end of the day. Judges, this is going to be a pretty clear win for the negation here at the point where my opponents simply, one, just don't do enough to solve for it, and second of all, concede that it's the highest layer in the debate. The tropicality shell impacts to accessibility, which is a prerequisite to accessing fairness and education in round. You can't debate if you don't have a good health. Second on the economy versus climate change. Even on the case level, we're still beating them there because the economy is a prerequisite to solving for climate change, especially developing countries, which are the biggest emitters, whereas Greenland and Sweden need that money. On the weighing debate, you can see that the econ improves while the quality of life while also solving for climate change, meaning that we have 100% solvency on climate change. But second of all, the magnitude is 100% greater because the probability of climate change is very little of solvency, whereas we get the entire probability of solvency.
Okay. Is everyone ready? The order is going to be tropicality.
The first advantage.
Tropicality. Wait, what are
No, word.
Okay. Well, tropicality. First advantage. Counterplans. Disad. Okay. If everyone's ready, 5 minutes. Starting now. Starting with tropicality. Tropicality isn't a voter. They can see the key solvency deficit. They're talking about fruit is going to make people more likely to eat fruit. For example, if I said I didn't have a favorite fruit, it wouldn't solve your interpretation. It doesn't do anything. Secondly, they say that this is a TOC court that people will watch. But again, people have the ability to pick and choose whether they eat free. And talking about it doesn't mean you will be able to solve back for this. If we win the solvency deficit, we take out the shell because they didn't get access to any of their voters by accessibility. They also can see that players aren't watching this round, meaning that it isn't related to the topic whatsoever. This means that our counter interpretation still stands. The debater should only address topics directly given within the resolution. They concede our predictability standard. There's no way for us to predict exactly what they want. They also concede that they ask a POI during protected time, meaning we couldn't even get it and predict this. Predictability is the internal elective fairness. This isn't a voter because we made the bright line that they have to directly prove its
order. Stop time. The argument that we asked a POI during protected time is a completely new argument.
We literally make arguments as to why.
Wait. Sorry.
We make arguments as to why we couldn't predict relatively what you were going to read, especially because it wasn't in the topic. And then we talked about how your POIs didn't solve because we didn't get access to answering them because they were in protected time. But
that's a new argument in my opinion, but judges' discussion because it's a panel.
Okay, cool. I'll resume at 4:15. Okay, starting now. This isn't a voter because we made the bright line that they have to directly prove it interferes with their ability to engage in the round, but they still read 3 off case positions, meaning that they haven't upheld the bright line. The shell is not a voter. You literally can't vote off of this. Again, they concede our warrant, which is that even if people watch it, they're not actually going to eat fruit, which means that they have a solvency deficit, so you can't vote off of the shell. Okay, now on the first advantage. We obviously are going to be winning the solvency advantage because at the key point, which is deforestation, we tell you that they don't solve back for deforestation. Look to the fact that the Rio Games literally caused 17,000 tons of waste. It used 30,000 gigawatts of electricity, and it consumed 24,500 liters of fuel. This literally goes conceded throughout the round. They tell us we don't solve back for climate change. Well, yes, we do. We say that we say we solve back for climate change because we stop all this thousands of liters of electricity going to waste. But second of all, this is literally happening twice a year. We stop that from happening because instead of happening twice a year, it's now only going to be happening twice ever in the history because now it's only going to be built once or twice. We tell you that the building of these stadiums is what's uniquely harmful. But now on the impacts here, we win that climate change outweighs the economy because we say that the only reason why people don't actually make climate change legislation is because they say that the economy outweighs. But we say that climate change comes first because that's what's actually causing extinction. And we say that extinction is first. But second of all, they concede that our weighing analysis about climate change comes before the economy. We say it's a prerequisite because the reason why people always ignore climate change is because they say that the economy is first. That's why we never do any climate change legislation. That's why we win this argument. They say we don't solve, but try or die. If we win the climate change argument, they make it worse. We help us because they reach the tipping point. That means we win all of our climate change arguments. Again, extend the fact that Rio went into debt by tens of millions of dollars. They couldn't possibly invest in renewables. We tell you that Sweden could invest in renewables now, or like already have renewables in place, which means we're not going to be having this countless waste of energy. They say that climate change is a global effort, but we're saying that you are making it worse by directly building this. Also, they could see that no countries have ever been able to put their money on into renewables. This is the only argument that they go for, and we take that out. Again, we take out that no country has historically ever invested in renewables, i.e. Rio de Janeiro. We say that Sweden and Ireland solve back because they already have renewables in place, which means that we're not wasting 24,000 gigawatts of electricity. Climate change literally comes first. You can't vote off of the economy. We say that that's the reason why the climate change is neglected. We say this causes extinction foremost, which is why you're voting off of this. Climate change comes first. Again, we give you countless words. We say deforestation, water pollution. We say 15 of the 27 venues were literally abandoned. They cause $1 million electric bill. We win the economy too. Again, the electric bill literally solves everything. We say that Rio de Janeiro had to pay $1 million in electric bills for 4 years after the Rio de Janeiro games already happened. This solves back for all theory economy impacts. It literally costs $1 million electricity bill. We say that we win on the economy too, but even if you don't buy that, climate change still comes first because the CP doesn't. Also, the CP doesn't solve the app because both still mean that you build up facilities and that triggers our climate change impacts first. Look, you're voting for the debater who best decreases climate change. That's obviously us because we say we're not wasting like these countless tons of electricity. But second of all, their counter plans. Okay, on their counter plans. First of all, they say that they're going to switch 6 different permanent restrictions, but it doesn't solve the app because you still have to build up facilities every 6 years. That still triggers our climate change impacts. We win climate change. We win this debate. But second of all, other second impacts. And on their second climate change about how they're only like they're going to deem which ones have the necessary infrastructure. We tell you that there's a solvency deficit because who gets to decide which? In order for them to have a counter plan, they need to actually have an actor, which means that they don't actually tell us who's going to be deciding this, which means both of their counter plans fall.
Order, stop time.
Yeah, sure.
I don't believe the argument that we don't have an actor for the second counter plan was ever made.
We make solvency deficits on the counter plan, specifically that the counter plan doesn't solve the AF and the actor like thing in the 1AR, but it's up to the judges.
Judge's discretion.
The RVI.
Okay. 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 Cool. I'll resume time starting now. Okay, now on the economy. We're winning the economy for a few reasons. First of all, we tell you that Rio de Janeiro fell into billions of dollars of debt after the games. We tell you that there's literally no net economic impact because of debt. This is what goes conceded throughout the round. We win debt, so we win this debate. We tell you that Russia also fell into $1 billion of debt after the games. We tell you that there's literally no economic impact. They also concede our 5 responses on their disad, which means they don't have access to their disad. One, you can extend that as a short-term drops, which means they have no impact. But second of all of their money for workers just go offshore to Dubai and Saudi Arabia. Third of all, we tell you that infrastructure is only built specifically for the games. Look to the fact that the Rio de Janeiro stadiums literally crumbled after the games ended because we couldn't actually garner any economic impact for that. But second of all, we're also going to be going for the second disadvantage. We win poverty, which means we win this debate. We tell you that they concede our extinction scenario throughout this round. In the block, they literally did not mention poverty. That's why we win this debate. Second, if you don't buy the climate change argument, you can vote off of the Civil War part. We tell you on poverty, the displacement, it literally displaced 20 million people in the last 20 million games. That means that at least 1 million people were displaced in the Seoul games and 1.25 million people were displaced in the Beijing games. You can extend our impacts here. We said that displacement means that an excess of homelessness and that leads to civil rights abuses and also that leads to uprisings. And the counterplan cannot solve this because again, there's still going to be displacement of 20 million people over the last 20 million games. That means the counterplan doesn't solve. That means that we win this debate because we say that that displacement leads to extinction because we're having excess civil war. That leads to uprising. We have access to 2 extinction scenarios. They don't get their disad because of debt. So that means we win climate change as outweighs the economy, but also we win displacement, which impacts such a civil war. Oh, real quick on the RVI debate, we can see that there are arguments about why RVIs are bad. So no one gets RVIs. We drop condos. There's no offense on it. Good debate.
All right, good debate.
Good debate. We'll be back soon.
Okay, is everyone back here?
We're here. My partner ran to the bathroom. She'll be back.
I think they all have their feedback in. Okay, so the decision was a 3-0 for Gov. I don't know, Eli, Jeff, if you guys want to start off by giving your feedback.
Sure, I can start. I think I don't know how you prepped me, but I think on my paradigm it says that I just don't buy free theory. So I didn't really evaluate tropicality at all. So I think it's like I mean, obviously, let's be real. But also I think even if I were to evaluate it, I think like there's not enough link into the standards themselves, or at least work done on that front. Like I don't understand how talking about tropical fruit um means that people will want to eat tropical fruit. Like I talk about how much I hate bok choy all the time. Um, I don't eat bok choy, and I don't think there's a sufficient link to say that just talking about something or even endorsing one tropical fruit as a favorite fruit means that we actually eat it. I think there could have been work done here in sort of like a satire K, because I think there's sufficient stuff there for this to work as a satire K. But I think as a theory show, it doesn't really work. Yeah, I also think you could have won a condo. Like I'm like I don't really buy condo theory that often, but like honestly, I think in this case it's valid. Mostly because you have two condo kind of plans, which not always enough to pull the trigger, but plus like no risk offense in the form of fifth theory. That might be enough for me to buy. Okay, yeah, these are just time sinks. Yeah, but it's okay. You didn't have to go for it. Just going on a case level, which is kind of what the debate turned into, pretty much. I think both teams did a very, very good job on case. I think these were some of the strongest cases I've seen, like just ever in parliamentary. So very, very, very big congratulations for both teams for making very good cases. I think the neg should have just spent less time on T and just more time on case. Because I think you end up spending far too much time on free theory for it to be worth running free theory. And I think the disads could have been much deeper. I think there's a lot of ground here as to why the plan is a bad idea. I think you do point out, at least initially, a lot of the big problems with this. It's pretty Eurocentric, right? Like the app makes quite a few assumptions about Greenland and Sweden that aren't well warranted, and I think could be grounds for a K. If you pressed harder on that, like just read it as a disadvantage or whatever, it would have been good. I talked about this more in depth in my written RFD, but like, there's a lot of ways you could have run just like if you wanted to do condo, like you could have run like 6 condo different kind of plans, some of them being like plans kind of plans. It would have worked. I think. But yeah, I think in terms of the actual like evaluation, I don't think the stuff that was extended for the disad level has enough on, I guess, I guess I get this weighing out of the PMR, which is that climate comes first, is that there's not enough analysis as to why this is actually good for the economy. And by extension the climate, because I think that's the internal link to the climate. The analysis that the net gives me is that 2 examples, one of Spain, one of Mexico, but they're all quite old. Like I think the most recent one, what's the Spain example, was like 1980s. Whereas half has grounds on recency. It's like, okay, yeah, like modern iterations of the Olympic Games are pretty bad for the local economy. So I think, yeah, I think the Unix should have used the counterplans, I think, more effectively. Like you had a lot of ground in there. It's like, okay, like we're still solving for, like all this excess construction that doesn't need to happen by just like rotating through 6 places. But we get added benefits of diversification. Like that's a unique benefit of like running lots of counterplans, right? So you want to go harder on that and make that very, very clear. Yeah, Neg also could have had an easier time by just saying that like climate change on the scale of Olympics is probably like pretty minimal, like all things considered. Like it's one thing that happens every 4 years. It's not that big of a deal. Like it's big in the short term, but it's not going to make a significant impact on our emissions, especially given that the time frame is so soon. It's like what, like 2 Olympic Games by the time we hit 2030. It's not going to be that big of a deal. And I think last bit of feedback for both teams is I think to make the cases even stronger is that you could have had some fun like talking about why Winter Games in particular would be better. Because I think a lot of the analysis happens here for the Summer Olympics. I think the resolution, hold on. Yeah, the resolution is like for winter and summer. I think a lot of analysis is centered around summer. yeah, you could have like talked about like like specific benefits for winter or whatever. But yeah, good job for looking. This was a very excellent round. I think you should both be very proud.
I can go ahead and go next. I want to echo a lot of what Jeffrey said. I think that was a great in-depth analysis. For me, my big takeaway was that for you, I think the time skew as far as spending a lot of time on your condo theory and your T-shell really hurt your case, just because I think your CPs could have had a lot of solvency, but that wasn't expanded upon, like Jeffrey said. I also think that your case was really strong, but that we ended up collapsing into a lot of theory, which obviously as an Oregon debater, I don't get exposed to as much theory as UCali people do. But I thought that honestly, it just took away from the case itself that you had on op. But I want to echo Jeffrey in that these were both really good cases, really well researched, thought out, and presented. The structure was amazing. So everything, especially with the speed, was easy to follow. And so I was really impressed by that. But yeah, I think that just focusing too much on the condo theory and the T-shell took away from the case. And ultimately it led me to the AF ballot just because there was a lot more structure and they collapsed further into the case, I think. But yeah, that's all I have to say.
Yeah, definitely agree with the analysis from both judges. Personally, I don't have anything against theory de facto, but even just the way this tropicality shell played out in the round, I think was not super favorable to the opposition. I think you guys did spend a lot of time trying to put a lot of responses on the shell, but the quality of those responses was like really not sufficient to what Gov said. So for example, like I think Op spent a lot of time being like, they concede this impact and they concede this stuff, but like responses can be made on multiple levels of the argument, right? So if your impact is accessibility and Gov concedes that impact, but they have a response saying that you do not get access to that impact because people are not going to change the way they eat based on our discussion in this round, like it's not much of a concession, right? Because you have no way to get to this impact of people getting better health since they're not actually going to change their behavior. So just things like that, I think it's helpful to focus like where people are making their direct responses and kind of, if you have pointed answers, you can respond to arguments in less time, but that'll ultimately have like a greater impact on the judge's decision. Also, I think everyone in this round like really decided to make theory a drop the debater issue, which is usually a pretty big deal. Like if you actually want the judge to drop the debater, you should try to go hard on that, collapse it, not do a 3-word extension in your final speech and be like, oh yeah, drop the debater. Like it would be helpful to have some repetition of like why this is really key to the round and how it's affected how it's played out if you really want judges to drop the debater based off of that. But yeah, I think like all the other judges, I ultimately ended up voting on case, and really it becomes really hard to vote for op just because you guys didn't have a ton of time to respond, and there's like a lot of dropped arguments. I put in some more detail in my written RFD, but overall, I think that's how it played out. But yeah, I agree that both teams had really strong arguments to begin with, and I definitely think Gov could have had a cleaner win if you had gone harder for. I think this round overall would have been much more interesting if Gov had kept their condo bad theory shell and Op had made it either, pulled their CPs through a little bit better because both the counterplans were actually really good and you actually could have had a chance of defeating the condo bad shell if you didn't kick either of the counterplans. But as it played out, like I didn't really hear too much about counterplans at the very end of the debate. Even though there were a lot of rebuttals made, I personally was a little confused about how these rebuttals were actually generating offense for the op team. Like, are they coming from the perspective of one CP or the other? Are they simply defensive arguments saying like what Gov's saying isn't true? I think there could also be like some more work terminalizing impacts there, but that's my feedback.
Okay, we don't have any questions. Thank you everyone for judging and debating, and good luck.